Hello, everyone. My name is Roger Ford, and as a board member for SID, I'm excited to join you today for SID's 2022 annual conference. As Managing Director and Global Co-Lead for Accenture Development Partnerships, our team focuses every day on driving inclusive and sustainable development around the globe in partnership with civil society, donors, governments, and the private sector. In this decade to deliver, the theme of inclusive development has never been more relevant or important. We must work inclusively with all stakeholders globally in order to realize the full potential of the SDGs. Inclusive business is so important that the compensation for half of all executives is tied to ESG and SDG performance. It's also a top priority for corporate boards. Inclusive business imperatives include creating measurable ESG and SDG impact areas across business functions, value chains, and in the community, gaining the trust of underserved consumers, suppliers, employees, regulators, and communities, leveraging digital and inclusive design to responsibly reach and serve new markets, nurturing equitable and inclusive workforces and value chains, and engaging in innovative partnerships to accelerate and scale impact. For this session, we will interview some of Accenture's clients and partners from around the globe to hear more specifically how inclusive development, ESG, and impact are driving their corporate strategies and C-suite agendas. More specifically, we will look at how companies are applying inclusive development in partnership with NGOs, implementers, donors, and government to realize the KPIs in their ESG strategies while simultaneously helping to advance the SDGs, while creating resilient and sustainable development solutions across their workforces and supply chains. We hope you find these interviews informative and engaging, and we look forward to partnering with you. Remember, inclusive development is not an option, it is an imperative. Thank you.
Well, Kathy, thank you so much for joining us today. For this interview for the SID conference, maybe just to begin, could you introduce yourself and speak about the role that you play for McCormick & Company?
Yes, absolutely, and thanks for inviting me, Mike. So I'm Kathy Ruskowski. I am the Purpose-Led Performance Program Director at McCormick, and Purpose-Led Performance is what we call our ESG strategy. So our purpose is our commitment to standing together for the future of flavor. And McCormick has a proud legacy of doing what's right for people, the communities where we live, work, and source, and the planet we all share. And our purpose-led performance principle is all about delivering top-tier financial performance while doing what's right. And so as the program director for Purpose-Led Performance, I coordinate across all of our Purpose-Led Performance initiatives, ensure that we have a roadmap to delivery, and ensure that we're able to report out on our progress to a multitude of stakeholders.
Well, maybe just to jump right into this kind of conversation around ESG, it'd be interesting for the SID audience to understand a little bit more about McCormick's ESG strategy and maybe, how you actually engage with SID community members, or peers of SID community members, INGOs, implementers, as you're executing your strategy.
Sure, absolutely. Purpose-Led Performance at McCormick is our ESG strategy, and it really couples the way McCormick provides superior financial results as a company while doing what's right. And we have divided our Purpose-Led Performance program into 3 key pillars. So people, the communities where we live, work, and source, and the planet we all share. And as part of that program, we've set ambitious targets, and we recognize that to create that long-lasting change that we're trying to see on our way to delivering that financial performance, we must collaborate with a multitude of stakeholders to leverage their experience and expertise. We recognize that we're on a journey. We know that we can't do it alone, and we often partner with non-governmental organizations like the ones that are part of SID, to provide assessments, trainings, conduct infrastructure development, as well as project management assistance. Some of our major collaborations have included those with IFC, NCBA CLUSA, CARE International, Heifer International, and the World Wildlife Fund. And we've also included partnerships with donor and governmental organizations. So we've worked with USAID, USDA, and GIZ. These relationships with both governments and NGOs are vital to our ongoing success. They allow us to drive greater impact at the source, and they're particularly applicable in our commitment to deliver increased resilience in smallholder farmers. So we've set a target that by 2025, we will increase resilience of smallholder farmers by 90%. And in our key iconic ingredients. And we've partnered to benefit 23,000 farmers to date, as well as their families and the communities that they live in.
No longer is it really, just purely kind of viewed as kind of a corporate foundation or a corporate social responsibility mindset, but there's an increased recognition that investing in these areas drives direct returns to the bottom line. Could you talk a little bit about that? Because I know from previous conversations, purpose-led performance is not kind of a separate subsidiary or some separate business unit, but actually sits within your finance function.
Yes, exactly. So my position sits in the finance function, and it really is in the words of the program, purpose-led performance. We believe at McCormick that by doing well, by doing good, we can do well as a company. So we lead with purpose in our decision making. It's embedded in sort of the company culture, and through that, we're able to achieve the financial superior results that I talked about. And partnering is an important part of that because we do need to create collaborative solutions on this journey. We know that we're not there yet, but we do know that when you look at the sustainability maturity of a company, it's moving beyond what you talked about, like separate philanthropy or compliance type of activities, to really having that cultural embodiment of environmental and social decision making in your company.
Clearly, there's also elements where, the work that you're doing, the investments are also strengthening kind of the resilience of the supply chains in which you work. And, it's interesting, I guess I'd be curious to understand, are there ways that you have started to experiment with measurement of that kind of increased resilience?
One example of a rewarding partnership that we had with an NGO is a partnership that we have with Care Impact Partners. So it's a division of Care International, and they support companies in building resilient enterprises while also delivering social impact. And we've partnered with them since 2018, and we worked with them to map the roles of women in the farming communities where we source. And these analyses that we conducted have reinforced the belief that women are involved in every aspect of the herbs and spice cultivation process, as well as maintain the responsibilities for the majority of unpaid work, when we think about childcare and household responsibilities. Now, that wasn't a surprise to us because it's something that we believed going in, and I'm sure it's not a surprise to anyone in the SID membership or SID audience, but it was clear that the opportunities existed for programming to address the gender imbalance. But the challenge was, how are we actually going to measure the impact of those initiatives and the impact that they would have, particularly on women's empowerment as part of the smallholder farmer population? And so we worked with Care Impact Partners to develop and launch a new framework. It's called McCormick Women's Economic Empowerment Framework, MWEF. And the approach is simple. So we assess the level of women's empowerment in our key sourcing communities. We design programming that addresses the opportunities that are identified to reduce the inequalities. And then the really important part is that we continuously track the levels of empowerment within the community and adapt the programming as needed. It's now being rolled out across our key supply chains, and it's starting with our iconic raw materials. And while deploying this, we're engaging with our suppliers to run projects focused on women's resiliency and that of our communities. And so it's something that's ongoing. We're continuously tracking and adapting our programs to be responsive to what those measurements are showing. And what we would like to see also is we think that this framework is largely applicable to other parts of the agriculture industry. So it would be great to see some uptake by other partners.
You mentioned a few of the NGOs and partners that you work with. I'm curious, how does McCormick, I guess, think about how they choose their partners and when they choose to partner versus handle things in-house?
We have set ambitious targets on our purpose-led performance program, as I mentioned, and we can't achieve them alone. So we look to partner in order to leverage expertise and experience to achieve those goals. ultimately partnering is an important part of doing well by doing good. And this example that I just provided with Care International, was a great example of that. In that partnership, it's an ongoing partnership. They bring specific expertise as well as on the ground implementation. And that piece in particular is very important. So the connection to the communities where we source is a big asset. And we look to partner to collaboratively build upon each other's strengths towards common outcomes. I know from my experience at USAID that NGOs have an important skill set. They also have unique and valuable on-the-ground approaches as well as networks. And I think another thing that NGOs bring, and we often see, is that transferable experience that offers rapid problem solving as well as applied learning as you go. So they might bring an example or an experience that can be tested in a new environment and adapted based on the other experiences that they have had. And so I think that organizations like the Society for International Development offer great opportunities to build new partnerships and other collaborative approaches.
Obviously, I think there's going to be more and more space to see collaboration like this, where NGOs are working side by side with corporates that are working in emerging markets. Yet I think sometimes the experience that INGOs have is much more oriented towards large bilateral donors than it is towards private sector. I'm curious if, having worked within USAID, but also now working within McCormick, is there advice you would give INGOs as they think about like a change in mindset, a change in how to engage, a different mindset around co-creation that's different with the private sector than it is with kind of the larger donor community?
I think there are actually some similarities. So for McCormick, it's a global company. We are a Fortune 500 company. We have operations all over the world. You may know McCormick by your spice rack, but we also have a multitude of other brands that you're familiar with. And so in order to achieve our global goals, we have to look at our operations and our sourcing at the site at which it's happening. And so I think that INGOs, in the way that they engage with USAID, often on a decentralized basis, by going directly to a mission or something like that, there are opportunities for that as well for a global organization like McCormick, where if you have a specific geographic expertise, that can be valuable to a specific subset of a larger target that we're trying to achieve. In terms of differences, I think that, one of the big things for McCormick is, we really are, as I've said, we're really trying to tie that purpose to the financial performance. So to the extent that INGOs can, shift their mental models to think about how creating social impact and improving environmental performance is tied with financial performance for a company, that can be beneficial to them in getting on the same page in what you're trying to achieve together.
Maybe to build on that, I know that a lot of brands, that you would normally see like McCormick in the grocery store are starting to, either pursue certification programs or others to differentiate kind of some of the investments they're making in ESG. I think of a Rainforest Alliance as an example, where you see the frog on the coffee. Is McCormick starting to look at, and not to not from a pejorative sense, but also to monetize, to see the financial performance come out of those ESG investments through brand differentiation?
Actually, we recently launched our own framework and standard called Grown for Good. And so Grown for Good takes a lot of the criteria that already exist in some traditional environmental standards, like some of the ones that you were mentioning, but goes a step beyond. So we look at criteria that include ethical sourcing, regenerative production practices on farm, as well as farmer resilience. So it's a standard that meets many of the environmental criteria that already exist in industry standards, but goes above and beyond to incorporate that farmer resilience piece and to move a bit beyond when it comes to the ethical sourcing as well as the regenerative production practices. That framework is something that we publicized recently in our purpose-led performance report. So you can find that on our website if you were interested in more of the details. But we are looking into opportunities to be able to use that standard on our packaging. So you will see that soon. And, you know, I think what is exciting about it is that it is going to be leading in the urban spice industry, and it allows us the opportunity to kind of set the bar for others to join. So that's something that I'm excited about. And then you asked also about the ROI. You know, we do believe that being able to provide sustainable products is a brand differentiator for McCormick. We know that consumers are asking for that kind of information and are thinking more carefully when they're purchasing their products at the grocery store. We also know that it's meeting customer needs as well. We're currently in the processes of doing some academic studies on, you know, more specific information on the ROI.
If when you do differentiate packaging, if I go to the grocery store aisle and buy a spice that is grown for good, what does that ultimately mean for the farmer? What should I know that the farmer that produced the black pepper or vanilla or whatever, whichever commodity is kind of aligned with that at the moment, what does that farmer experience differently than maybe others that are not under the Grown for Good certification mechanism?
Our Grown for Good standard does involve farm level certification. So it will be to the farm in terms of the environmental and agricultural practices that are being practiced by the farmer. We are engaged in you know, training smallholder farmers to ensure that they're meeting a certain sustainability standard when it comes to that. But I think what's really important is that what we've done in our farmer resilience programming, which is tied to this Grown for Good framework and standard, is that we in many cases have been able to remove intermediaries or brokers that are basically you know, serving as a connection point from smallholder farmers to larger suppliers. And by doing that, you know, we are able to ensure a certain purchase price from the farmers, which means that it's improving their livelihoods. They are making more money on this new supply chain with the intermediaries removed than they would have been in the past.
So their incomes are higher as a result of being underneath this mechanism.
Yeah, and that's something we're measuring as part of farmer resilience. So we're looking at increased livelihoods, so incomes, as well as access to basic services. So that can be healthcare, water sanitation, education, and other trainings that are specific to agricultural processes.
Are there things as we look towards the future that you see as kind of on the horizon with ESG or on the horizon for McCormick that are kind of next big thing that you're seeing there being movement towards, or maybe things that INGOs should be on the lookout for as they're looking for ways to collaborate more?
Sure. Recent years, global events have just really heightened the expectation of all stakeholders on the role of corporates when it comes to environmental and social impact. And so what that means is we will all need to be moving beyond commitments and showing action, particularly around issues around climate change, as well as an increasing emphasis on the social impact, which isn't necessarily separate from climate change, because we know that, you know, particularly vulnerable populations might be disproportionately affected by climate change. So I think what we're going to see in the near future is more of a demand on, good information on what companies are actually doing to address climate change, as well as improve social impact. And I think that with the regulatory environment evolving around ESG, that demand is going to come really quickly with a lot of regulation and specificity around what companies will be required to report. So it's no longer becoming optional, even for those companies that may have been, more on the philanthropic side or more on the compliance side. That compliance threshold is actually going to be increased for all companies in the US as well as in the EU.
Kathy, I greatly appreciate your time today. It's been fascinating to hear a little bit about what McCormick is doing, and certainly, as you suggested, I would advise all of those that are interested to go check out your purpose-led performance report, learn more about the Grown for Good certification method, and keep an eye on McCormick, because obviously you guys are one of the ones out there leading. But thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Mike. It's been fun.
Great.
So thank you, Valentina. Could you please briefly describe the role that SIA Foundation play supporting American companies with their ESG objectives?
Sure. Thank you for the invitation. Our work in SIA Foundation is to promote alliance between American companies, international cooperation, principal USAID, and public sector. What we do is to design, implement, and develop projects and initiatives that support and create projects to promote or to improve livelihoods, to promote health, to promote the best development of territories in Colombia. And we support the American company to achieve their ESG objectives, because in these projects we promote to improve the environmental and social objectives principles. And 2 months ago, we are starting working in the governance also.
Thank you, Valentina. And your perspective, how the companies execute their ESG strategy, and specifically in relationship on how they work with NGOs and implementers?
Sure, that is a really important question. What we already see in the American companies is that they are looking for NGOs and implementers that use KPIs, that use criteria of ESG, that they are looking for different NGOs, not for only philanthropic. They are looking for NGOs that directly improve the ESG in a community or in a city, that promotes the different things that they are looking for. The companies are measure all the things that they do. The companies are looking for NGOs that help to impact the business, and not only for a philanthropic thing.
Great, no, thank you. And I can imagine that being American companies, like all the NGOs wants to work with them. And I would like to understand how have you seen like how they select the NGOs or the partners that they would like to work with?
Sure, that is true. The NGOs dream to work with American company, but what we see is that American company each day improve the criteria to choose NGOs. Right now, they look at different criteria. They look for sustainability, how transparency, how they use their money, the follow-up of the projects, the criteria of choosing the participants, the criteria of choosing the things that they give to the participants, what are the KPIs that the foundation or the NGO use to do the project, how they administrate the money. So like, I think that right now American company choose NGOs with the same criteria or of choosing another different person in the company. They don't see like, it's an NGO, so do a different criteria. No, they already choose these NGOs with the same criteria of the other different stakeholders of the company.
That's very important, and how the Council of American Companies like play a role there, like how you usually support with the NGOs connection, or why more specifically they decide to go to talk and to work with the Council of American Companies in this case.
That is one of our best work. What we do is to support the NGOs to achieve the criteria of the companies. Many times there are a lot of projects, really good NGOs that don't have the support to do a presentation to American company. For example, because they don't speak English, or they don't know how to do a presentation to one of this company, or don't have the finance to be a supplier of this company. So what we do is to work together with these NGOs and with the companies to be working together, and these two organizations being like in a middle part and work together. That is one of our best projects. We also teach the NGOs how to do KPIs, how to do better management of the money, to put transparency criteria, and that is one of our most important things in SEA Foundation, to improve other NGOs so we have best implementers in Colombia.
Right. Thank you very much, Valentina, for your important insights and for your support.
Thank you to you. Have a nice day.
Hello, everyone. I am joined, my name is Pratt Panda, and I'm a lead in the Accenture Development Partnerships team, and I'm joined today by Sasha Kapadia, who is with Mastercard in their Humanitarian Development Group. Sasha joined Mastercard in 2013 and has been working with humanitarian development agencies to mobilize Mastercard solutions and expertise for good. Notably, she leads the Smart Communities Coalition, a public-private network to transform the delivery of services to refugees and host communities. Other achievements include the launch of the Mastercard Aid Network, an award-winning digital voucher platform, and working closely with Mastercard senior executives on high-profile events such as the World Economic Forum, and she is also a graduate of the Fletcher School and New York University. Sasha, welcome.
Thanks, Brad.
Great to have you. Great. So today we wanted to dive into a little bit of a discussion around how Mastercard is thinking about ESG and the SDGs and partnerships with international development organizations. And just to that end, let's get into it. I want to just start with, in broad terms, what is Mastercard's ESG and or SDG strategy, and maybe how is Mastercard thinking about those two in different ways or in aligned ways?
Sure. I think it's a really important question, and one that we've been looking at for a really long time. As you said, I've been with the company almost 9 years, and so we've been thinking about a broader social impact strategy since way before ESG became a hot topic among corporates and other companies. And so the vision for why my team was created was really to build an innovation practice around social impact, to understand how we could mobilize our technology, our data, our expertise, and find ways to address some of the big, persistent, complex challenges out there in the world, knowing that the humanitarian sector was moving towards the inclusion of more digital tools, of driving cash transfers to vulnerable populations. We saw a natural fit for our company to get involved and to participate. And so as we've progressed on this journey, so my team, Humanitarian and Development, looks at building relationships with, as you said, humanitarian and development organizations on a shared value partnership basis. But we also have lots of different teams at the company who are thinking about the other areas of ESG, right? So there's the internal facing work, thinking about our environmental footprint, about all of the traditional products that we put out into the world with our financial institution partners. How do we assess the impact of those different tools and programs? And then there's work that we're doing looking at, I guess, modifying or adapting, credit, debit, prepaid tools that are in our wallets today, how to make them useful and relevant in the humanitarian and development context. So there's a lot of work going on right now.
Amazing. So it really seems that your group is looking to figure out how best to apply Mastercard's core capabilities and products and assets to progress social impact objectives more broadly, working with humanitarian and development organizations.
That's right.
And that's fantastic. And so can you elaborate a little bit in terms of how you work specifically with these organizations, these international development or humanitarian organizations, in pursuit of your impact goals?
Yeah. So it can often be a long process, right? Because we have to identify the right sets of partners, right? So we've done quite a bit of work over the years to understand where we can be most relevant, where our solutions have the most relevance. And so we, at first, I would say we cast a very, very wide net because we were just trying to get a better understanding of where we could fit in. And so we were talking to anybody and everybody that would, have a 30-minute call with us. But at this point, I think we've gotten quite sophisticated with our technology and quite sophisticated with our strategies. So we're looking at digital inclusion. We're looking at establishing digital infrastructure. And so we're working with partners and assessing rather the partners that can help us establish and lay down that digital infrastructure, because we see that as being a critical gap today in how we address needs.
And what are the key success factors for forming those relationships? As you said, they're likely, I'm sure, oftentimes unlikely partnerships between the likes of a Mastercard and a Save the Children or an HCR.
Yeah.
Curious how that happens.
Well, I think first and foremost, you have to identify the common interest, right? You have to uncover the common objectives because they're there, but it takes some effort often to uncover that common interest and those common objectives. And that effort has to be supported by trust, right? There has to be a willful and thoughtful engagement on the part of both sides, right? To not immediately assume that there's some sort of nefarious intent behind, a company like Mastercard's interest in engaging in this space, but rather an open-mindedness and an ability and a willingness to perhaps take a leap. So there's got to be trust.
And how do you measure success then? Of okay, you've built that trust, you've gone on this journey together. What does success look like for you along the journey or at the end of the journey?
Yeah, success is something happening, because very often we get stuck in the talking phase, right? It's let's ideate, let's conceptualize, let's pull together our priority countries. And so you get into this mode of talking and talking and talking and talking, and the potential is there, and yet you often find yourself in the position where you're still in that potential mode, right? I think success is actually seeing something launch. It's seeing a program go live. It's being able to reach the people we wish to reach, collectively. And so that's how we measure success. The people that we end up serving.
Do you are there any key kind of learnings from the trenches, so to speak? Challenges that we've had to overcome in these partnership journeys, some things that unforeseen. You've built that trust. You've kind of started going down a path together, and you're doing something and not just co-creating, but something doesn't work out. And what I'm just curious, open-ended. What are some lessons that you've learned along the way?
Yeah, it's a good question, right? Because I think there's still a lot of work that needs to get done on the structures, right? That would enable effective partnerships, right? So you can identify the common interest, identify the common objectives, lay out a plan, pick a country, and then you get to contracting. And contracting becomes a nightmare, right? Because the contract could be written from the perspective of that international development organization, and it can be a real challenge getting a set of corporate lawyers to then accept the terms of that contract, not by any resistance or a lack of wanting to get the thing off of the ground, but there are very different expectations when it comes to contracts and these kinds of negotiations. So I find that it would be ideal for us to, it's not exciting at all, right? To think about streamlining or improving contractual processes. But it's absolutely essential if we want to get more public-private partnerships off the ground, because yeah, it ends up being an impasse that unfortunately derails all of the goodwill and the faith that's been put into the process of coming up with something. So yeah, I would say some of the admin, contract, service level agreements, just really unsexy things, but unfortunately very important.
And you know what that makes me think of is that this is a great example of a manifestation of probably a bigger challenge when you're talking about cross-sector partnerships. And that challenge is kind of the challenge that we often speak different languages.
Yeah.
And not just, you know, French versus Greek or something, but the language of development versus the language of business cases and multinational companies. And you know, how much of that contributes to the challenges, and also how do you overcome some of that? You know, the fact that we speak different languages across sectors.
Well, I think it helps to have cross-pollination, right? So I'm a very proud graduate of the Fletcher School. I worked in global policy and international development prior to coming to Mastercard. I think someone like you, Pratt, has such a deep knowledge and understanding of the needs of the sector. You know, it helps when people know what you're talking about and the context that you come from, right? So this cross-pollination of having people from the development sector enter the private sector and vice versa, right? So that you can chip away at this translation issue, right? Once you have I guess a quorum, right, of people who are on both sides of the table, then the language barrier ceases to exist, right? Because all of a sudden you have some context, some understanding of what the other is saying. I absolutely think it's a problem. I think it's getting better though.
That's great. So on a kind of parting note, I suppose, last question here. You talked about kind of cross-pollination and getting people to move into private sector from civil society and civil society from private sector. Any just parting words of wisdom for, you know, what opportunities there are for listeners to, like, how would they make such transitions, and not just career transitions, but also, you know, for people that might be listening that are, you know, very technical people that don't get into, you know, the partnerships discussions. You know, what advice would you have for those people? And then maybe there's some people that are listening that, you know, would seek career guidance. So I'm sure you have some great words of wisdom there.
Yeah. What I think is so exciting, and it's something that I envisioned happening, you know, joining the private sector, but it's I think happened on a much more rapid pace than I even expected. But this explosion of interest in social impact and ESG and all the different flavors thereof, right? So I sit on a team at Mastercard that's really looking at social impact as a business, right? Deploying our innovation capacity to try and put out technology that we think will improve the conditions of people's lives. But there is so much other work in ESG that I think could really benefit from the experience and the expertise of people in the civil society sector, right? So we're looking at a lot of interest now in ethical supply chains, right? People who have done livelihoods work, especially in countries where there are huge manufacturing industries, sectors, would be really well suited to go to a private sector company and help them think through their strategy on ethical supply chains, better working conditions, fair labor, all of that, right? If you look at the environmental side, I mean, massive interest, especially those with technical skills, as you said, in helping to think through, you know, the environmental impact of internal operations, but you know, the externalities created by the business operating in the world, right? So how do some of those assessment skills come into play when looking at a company's environmental footprint? I think there's lots of opportunities for cross-pollination. As I said, it's just a matter of finding the niche, finding the area that resonates most with one's experience.
Amazing. And I think that's the theme of this conversation, but really I think a theme for the decade to come is this idea of cross-pollination, and that's the necessary ingredient for getting us to where we need to be. So Sasha, thank you so much for the conversation. This has been fascinating.
Thanks, Pratt. Always a pleasure.
Hi, everyone. My name is Gabby Oken. I'm the Energy Lead with Accenture Development Partnerships, and I'm joined today by Peter Nieko, the CEO of Mandulus Energy. Hi, Peter. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be as you listen to this across the world. Thank you.
Great. So, Peter, maybe just to get started, can you share a little bit about who you are, about Mandulus Energy, what the company does?
Awesome. I'm Peter Nieko from Uganda in East Africa, and director and co-founder at Mandulus Energy. Mandulus has been around for quite a while now, and we develop renewable energy projects in Uganda. That's where we've been working, but we're also doing the same thing now in other countries as well. When we talk about renewable energy, we look at electricity, we look at cooking fuel, we look at industrial heating fuel, we look at renewable energy as a whole. We focus a lot at the moment on turning agricultural waste, such as rice husks, maize cobs, and groundnut shells, into renewable energy. So we convert that into biogas, into syngas. We have byproducts such as biochar, which is a coal replacement, also a soil enhancer. We have byproducts such as biofertilizer, which replaces chemical fertilizers. But what's really exciting is you can get electricity, you can get packaged gas that can replace LPG, and all that is renewable, all that is affordable, all that is reliable, and at the best quality you can get anywhere in the world. And that's what makes us most excited about.
Thanks so much, Peter. The model really is phenomenal. And interestingly, through such a unique circular model, you've worked with a number of corporates over the years. Over the last decade of Mandulus's existence, how have you seen corporate investment pivot towards a more inclusive, localized business solutions as the ESG momentum has continued to really gain emphasis?
Thank you very much. We've seen lots of interesting moves, especially with regards to global corporates that operate globally and that rely on supply chains that are global, as well as supply chains which are located where they are operating from. Let's look at the beverage industry, for example. If we think about breweries, we've got big breweries that are global companies that operate in hundreds of countries around the world. But wherever they are operating, they need access to cornstarch. They need access to barley, to hops. They need access to other inputs that are derived from grains. Now, what we've realized is that many years ago, most of these large corporate brewery entities would centralize all their, or most of their procurement in order to meet the quality standards. But now what's happening is they've figured out how to localize their supply chains wherever they may be actually based, so that if they're in a particular country X where they are actually supplying the products, they can actually source the majority of the grains that lead to their inputs. They can even source the heating fuel that's needed to run their boilers and so on from locally available agricultural residues. So what we've seen right now is more and more global companies are moving in that direction. And what makes it really exciting is there's an opportunity to make that viable whereby they don't only make that move in order to meet ESG targets and meet sustainability targets and to get them closer to net zero, but that's actually a lot more affordable, or can be made a lot more affordable than what the alternative may be it replacing heavy fuel oil, be it replacing diesel gensets, or be it replacing having to ship cornstarch, and other grains across the world.
It's just amazing. Maybe in that same vein, how do you feel hiring practices have evolved, both within the organization's workforce, as well as in how they hire for different programs that they may be collaborating on with donors, perhaps through their CSR initiatives as well?
Awesome. What we've seen there is, for most global companies, they've got great graduate programs wherever you may be across the world, and you've got movement from one branch to the other, from one ecosystem to the other, to make sure expertise and talent is shared across the amazing networks that they do have. But what we've seen really interesting is that more and more of these large corporate entities have realized that they can actually benefit from partnerships with smaller companies, like ours and others like us, who can deliver particular experience that would save such a large entity building up a whole new department, especially as we move towards renewable energy, as we move towards circular economies and sustainability. It has proved that it makes sense, and they've actually gone ahead with it in many cases, partnering with smaller companies to help in many ways deliver a lot more efficiency, where you find that a local company, a smaller company at a particular location can support a large corporate, not just in their operations in that country, but in their operations across the world, where the conditions, in which solutions are being delivered and curated and innovated, can be replicated in other parts of the world to deliver more value.
Fantastic. And maybe turning inwards for a second, can you share a little bit about how Mandulis measures results within the distributed ESG ecosystem, especially as an organization that is not only, already carbon neutral, reach net zero, but, selling offsets to other companies as they continue on their energy transition journey?
Awesome. Thank you very much. I mean, we are really glad that we're working in a space that enables us and allows us to actually be able to not only be net zero, but help others get to their net zero targets. What we've realized is we're able to measure renewable energy in kilowatt hours generated and deployed. We're able to, and that in many ways that replaces, in electricity, that we're replacing diesel generated electricity, for example. We're able to measure how many tons of, of briquettes that have replaced firewood, and we can measure how many tons of biochar has replaced coal and firewood in industrial furnaces, and so on and so forth. We're also able to measure how many tons of biofertilizer has been deployed, whereby the chemical fertilizers have been replaced. So as we measure all the volumes of our outputs, considering that every unit output that comes out of our ecosystem is in itself, an output that supports the mitigation of the negative effects of climate change, puts us already in a fantastic position. We go one step further by now looking at different methodologies that enable us to calculate what the replacement is. For example, we're able to calculate the tons of wood that we've replaced. We can calculate the tons of heavy fuel oil that has been replaced by us supplying our clients. We can calculate, how many tons of CO2 has been replaced when or kind of offset by people using our products and services instead. So all those are how we have been making these calculations, and it's actually helped us deliver our solutions, because we've been able to complete forward sales in futures of our carbon offsets on the projects that we do run, based on the fact that we're able to make these calculations and make these measurements, and link them into some of the long-term contracts which we do have. Case in point, we operate in parts of Africa where we have 20-year concessions to run off-grid utilities, micro utilities that are, serving villages of a few thousands of households. Considering that we are able to do that, it basically enables us to not only make it viable for those communities in terms of them accessing what they need in terms of value addition, improving their incomes and so on, but we're able to lock them into very interesting virtuous cycles, that opens up their horizons to move from smallholder farming, subsistence farming, to long-term, confirmed status as farming becoming a sustainable job that someone can think about for 20 years, because we will buy agricultural waste for 20 years to run our power plants. We will buy back the biochar when people use our cook stoves and our biomass briquettes. We buy back the post-cooking waste as well. We're able to share our carbon offset sales with some of these communities. When you think about the value of what we bring in, if you look at tripling incomes by access to agriculture, value addition, access to markets through our ecosystems and our platforms. If you look at the biochar that we're able to buy back from those who cooked with our cook stoves and a cooking fuel. If we look at all the other savings, you find that a family is able to go from living below the poverty line to actually earning every month what the minimum wage in a country like Uganda is every year. That's what's really exciting about this.
Absolutely fantastic. I mean, we talk about circularity models. Mandoulas is really running a multi-circularity model when you think about all of these different points of impact across the ESG spectrum. Thank you so much, Peter. It has been such a pleasure to chat today, and we look forward to continuing to watch Mandoulas grow from success to success.
Thank you very much, and we look forward to everyone out there joining us on this journey, as we continue to power what we believe is a future of hope. Thank you.